All right, let's learn about borrowing. Borrowing things in Rust. I'll borrow 5 things from you, you borrow 6 things from me. Okay. All right, not quite that, but similar. We looked at ownership, right? And we discussed memory allocation, the stack versus heap. And we saw how we can't just take ownership from multiple variables of what those values are because of space allocation. And that's a good thing, right? That's why Rust is the way it is. But we still want to be able to work with our variables, right? We still want to be able to use variables without having to jump through so many hoops and loops in order to make the most out of what we're building. And this is where the concept of borrowing comes in. So it can be quite a hassle transferring ownership of a variable to another function and then returning ownership. All right. But through temporarily transferring ownership of a value, what happens is that Rust supports borrowing ownership. All right, in which the ownership is then returned to the original owner. We do this with references, as we're going to see in this lesson. So functions in Rust, they can transfer their control of a value to another function temporarily. All right, and that's really what we call borrowing. When we talk about borrowing, that's what it's about. So you can pass a reference to the variable, with a variable name, and you use the AND. We'll see. We use the AND symbol to do this, as opposed to passing the variable itself. So the differentiation here, and what I want you to really get from this is using the AND symbol doesn't just create another pointer of memory. What it's doing is actually referencing the memory that's already there. Okay? The ownership of the variable value is then transferred to the original owner of the variable. That's how it works. Now, if that's a bit confusing, let's clear it all up with some examples. All right, so let's do it. So suppose we have a function. We're going to write this out. And let's make another vector. So we're having fun with our vectors. So remember, we can bring in the vector macro. Let's say we've got 1, 2, 3. And you know what? Let me show you something first. Let's say we have a function. Let's say we have a function that just wants to call and display what the vector is. Let's say we have this function display, and we're going to pass in a vector as an argument. So this function is going to supposedly take this vector as an argument. We didn't write it, but we're about to. And then we're going to print. So we're going to say print. Let's say we want to print the second value. So the second value from our vector. So that would be 1. Okay, now we actually need to write this function out. So I'm going to say function display, and we'll just take x as a value here. I'm going to say vec for vec, which will be IE32. We'll say vec, and we can do IE32. And you could also print, we'll say the vector here, so that'll be x. All right, and so what do we have happening here? Well, we've got our main function, which basically has this vector has a vector variable, right? And then we have this function display that takes vectors as a variable. All right. Now we want to display what this vector is. So it's taking this argument, so it should be able to take IE32. These are IE32 vectors, so the input should work. There's no mismatch. But will this actually work? Well, according to up here, it shouldn't work, right? Because this vector is taking space, and then we're going to borrow it with this function, and we have this other function running it. So if I run this right now, sorry, it's not actually borrowing, we're going to see an error, cannot find type IE32. All right, I don't know why I'm saying IE, it's a morning. This should just be I32, need more coffee. Let's run this again, fix that. Hopefully some of you caught that mistake. All right, and we're going to see this is the error I want to show you. Borrow of moved value vector. All right, so, and it particularly happens, Rust notices this at line 22, right? Because we're trying to pass in vector here, and wait a minute, the value was borrowed here after the move. So you can't do that. You can't actually do that. And hopefully that makes sense. If I were to comment out the print and I run the code again, we're going to see that we get it, right? We're going to see that we get it because display can do it, but now our original vector space has been defaulted out. How do we actually maintain the values of our variables and still be able to run these additional functions without running into these annoying hurdles? And the answer, of course, is borrowing. It works with the and symbol. When we pass this and symbol, we create a reference. We're pointing as a reference. So if I were to comment this out, all right, the display over here, I'm going to copy and paste over here. What I could do is display and vector, so now we're passing the reference, but this isn't enough because we also want to let the function know in the parameter that what we want is a reference being passed in, right? Because it needs to check for the type. So we could say and vec over here as well. And if we run it now, we're going to see 1, 2, 3. And if we rerun our print, so we comment the print back in and we want to fetch the second value here, right, our first index value, and we run again. See what happens now. Look at that. We get 1, 2, 3. So the display is coming out. And then we see 2. We see 2. This 2 is what? This 2 is our second value here in our vector. So now we're actually able to access our vector, and we get to maintain the memory allocation of what vector is, and we can print it out with references. And we do that with the and symbol. And I know I said and a lot, but and that's how it works. And that's how it works. And that's an important concept to grasp in Rust. So if you're grasping it, congratulations. This is very important. I feel pretty good about this lesson, so let's stop it right here and test you with an exercise that will take a bunch of different things we've been learning throughout this course, including borrowing and references, and test your knowledge. Okay, so have a little break, and whenever you're ready, I'll see you for the exercise. Bye-bye.